Welcome to another episode of the Seven Laws podcast. My name is Michal Pur and I'm a podcast commentator and analyst, and I'm joined by Professor Miroslav Barta. Hi, Mirek.
Hi, Michael. Good morning, everyone.
Yeah, but Mirek is not only a world-renowned Egyptologist, but also the author of the Seven Laws theory that helps explain the fall and growth of civilization. That's true, I think.
Yeah. And our primary objective is to guide you through this world, to show you interesting parallels in the past in order to understand the future, and always apply the theory of seven laws and explain how they apply to this or that phenomenon. So welcome and stay with us.
Yes. This episode will be about globalization, I would say. Kind of globalization. I think that our civilization sometimes pretends that globalization isn't our invention. Is it?
It's a frequent mistake we tend to do, as did our predecessors in the past, even in the very remote past. Since the Old Kingdom builders of the pyramids, virtually every civilization thought we are the apogee of mankind, we will never perish. We are the ultimate solution to this planet. And all of them, you know what? All of them were completely mistaken. And one of our tasks in this podcast is to spread as much knowledge about history and contemporary world as possible in order not to end up like the civilizations before us, because we are in many ways quite unique in contrast to the previous civilizations. We have the knowledge, we have the data, which are two different things. That's very important to realize. We have communication means, we have money, we have technologies. So we have all pros to prevail, to manage any crisis, whatever comes. And we should use all these our trumps to not to perish.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean we will prevail. Yeah,
it's not the ultimate guarantee that we would prevail. But as I said, theoretically, we have all aces to maintain our civilization, and that's what matters to me, because all of us have some families, partners, friends, kids. So we have a responsibility. So one of the consequences is that everyone should take over its part of responsibility, and to see how we can make this world sustainable and better.
The late Bronze Age is where I'm headed. A friend of yours, Eric Klein, the famous historian, he was in Prague a few weeks ago, wrote a book called 1177 Before Christ, where he chronicles the fall of civilization in the Mediterranean. The Mediterranean means around the Mediterranean Sea and on the islands in the Mediterranean. And that world seems to me to be overly globalized. As I already said something about globalization. Is it like that?
That's quite true. Eric was a guest of our Czech Institute of Egyptology a couple of weeks back. He presented two talks, one of them in Prague, talking about his latest book, After 1977. And the second talk took place in Ostrava, which is a city about 400 kilometers northeast of Prague. And during the festival Melting Pot, he presented his previous book, 1177. And I have to say that Eric is one of the best archaeologists in the U.S. Extraordinary writer of books for a wider audience. He's a highly acclaimed scholar as well, and the subject of his recent studies pertains really to the world that collapsed at the beginning of the 12th century BC, and it's quite a complicated, fascinating story. He basically makes the following point: at the beginning of the 12th century, the world that existed at that time was quite global. So he talks about ancient Greece, the empire of Hittites, ancient Egypt, states that existed in what we call nowadays Syro-Palestine, Iraq, and Iran, and then it was really the real global world. They communicated with each other. They were people were moving upwards and downwards, eastwards, westwards. They ruled the Mediterranean. They were able to travel as far as to China, Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India, and these civilizations were able to sign the first peace treaties in the human history, like the Hittites and the ancient Egyptians, Hattusilis and Ramses II. It's the earliest peace treaty guaranteeing that the countries were exchanging or returning fugitives, for instance, that they were respecting international borders, that they were helping each other in case of war, in case of emergency, like Egypt supplying grain in the case of when the Hittites were starving due to climate changes. They were exchanging luxury goods. And so on. So this is the introduction. And Eric Klein, a professor at the George Washington University, so Eastern Coaster, is one. I would say actually that he's the best expert in this period as we speak.
It's unbelievable that it's more than 3,000 years ago. Actually, in the Europe back then, we were like barbarians. Or like we lived in a wilderness
and pits and wooden houses.
Yes. Yeah, in wooden houses, and there were a civilization already which was very similar to us.
The explanation is relatively simple.
It is possible.
These civilizations had access to major resources of energy at that time.
Really? What kind of resources?
It was water. It was very intensive and extensive agriculture.
Yeah.
And the agricultural output that was generated by these countries enabled them to, build up armies, to build up state-sponsored projects, be it pyramids, be it Valley of the Kings, be it huge cargo ships, palaces, temples, etc. And everybody was profiting, because if you have a country that is rich, that has plentiful resources, and the elite is wise enough and trained sufficiently to be able to share at least significant part of this wealth with the majority of the population, everybody is happy, and the whole thing proliferates. And that's the trick that is related to the social contract, because we can see today, we talk about the elites, 1% of the elites that generate 2/3 of the pollution. Yeah. And so on and so forth. And the point is, if we don't pay sufficient attention to this fact, namely that the elites running the states, running the corporations, etc., should really take care of the majority of the population in terms of giving them work, fostering new projects that have some perspective of building, the environment, etc. We will lose again.
Yeah, I read the book a few weeks ago, and what was, from my point of view, what was I was amazed by that, it's the knowledge. Actually, there wasn't a paper. There were desks or something like that, and they were almost like us, the same.
I'm sorry to say that.
I know
we have
it could sound silly for you because you are an Egyptologist and archaeologist, but from my point of view, it's surprise. I was really surprised.
Well, do you know what? The cure to your amazement is the fact that it was your first book in archaeology.
Yes,
you should read definitely more of them.
Yes.
As you who are listening to us,
yes.
read more books about archaeology and history. Because even Winston Churchill was saying, the deeper I can see in the history, the farther I can see into the future. And that was Winston Churchill, who managed to defeat the Germans during the World War II. So I think there is some wisdom to this saying. Definitely, they were quite modern, and people are quite modern at least 50,000 years as far as the capacity and intellectual potential of a human brain is concerned, at least I say. And a wonderful example how to prove it is the story that is called the Archimedes Codex. They were some palimpsest, so reinscribed letter scrolls discovered on the eastern coast in Baltimore. And when they were examined in detail, the scientists figured out that they contained texts that were known, being written by Archimedes, but actually never discovered. And they discovered these mathematical texts. And American mathematicians who examined the problems formulated by Archimedes said, these are such complicated concepts that Archimedes would be perfectly in a position to discuss them with the top mathematicians of the 20th century. So this is a wonderful example that is more than 2,000, 200, 300 years old. And it shows you that, this Archimedes was an excellent mathematician, even by our standards. And if you are interested in this story, go to Amazon and find the book under the title The Archimedes Codex, and you can still purchase it.
Yeah. What is also unbelievable is that the Egyptian or Mediterranean civilization, mainly Egyptian, actually it was lasting thousands of years. That's unbelievable from our point of view, because our civilization lasts like hundreds of years. It's nothing to the Egyptian, it's nothing to Chinese, it's nothing maybe to Indian. So what did Egypt look like before the 1177 BC?
It already went through a long history that starts let's say around 3000 BC, when the ancient Egyptian state comes into being. It starts with the Old Kingdom. We will talk about it later on in this podcast, about the rise and fall of the Old Kingdom. That is quite similar to our modern times. And it lasted, say, from the 27th to the 22nd century BC. Then there came a period of about 2 centuries that Egypt lost its complexity, because all of a sudden they lost resources due to climate change. Then it reemerges again during the 20th century, lasts again for about 3 or 4 centuries. Then there is the second intermediate period. And then comes the highlight we talk about, the New Kingdom. For us, the New Kingdom is mainly 18th to 20th dynasties. Emperors and rulers like Hatshepsut and Amenhotep III, Amenhotep IV Akhenaten, the famous religious reformer, maybe to some scholars still the guy who introduced the monotheism in the history of mankind. It can be so. And then we have the Ramesside, the military family, which established us with Seti the first, with Haremheb, one of the successors to King Tut. At the end of the 18th dynasty, he established a military dynasty, which we call the 19th dynasty, the so-called dynasty of the Ramessides. And Ramesses II, Ramesses III, were the people directly taking part in this process that started at the end of the 13th century BC and peaked in a way around 1177 with what Eric calls a collapse of the world. Of course, it's overdoing or oversimplifying the thing, but in a language of symbols, it delivers perfect service. So for Eric, 1977 is the year when the world as we knew it before disappears, and the whole Eastern Mediterranean, or Mediterranean as such, plus the Middle East, plunge into a long crisis that lasted for 2 or 3 years, 2 or 3 centuries. And I won't say any secret here and now. that Eric is preparing a third book, a sequel that will talk about this period of restoration of powers and etc. And I dare to mention it now because he talked about his intentions during
Yeah.
his talks here, and I'm sure that he's doing the same
But
when
it
lecturing the
takes
States.
years to write
It will
such
take him,
book.
of course. He is a beloved professor, teacher. He has many commitments at the university, but at the same time, he's an exceptional scholar in the academy there. So I hope they will give him enough time and means to write this book as soon as possible. And then I would highly recommend to have him as a guest here in Dataran.
Yeah. The problem started by the attacks of so-called sea people. Who are they?
Eric dedicates to this issue a whole chapter. So, in simplified terms, these sea people was a amalgam of different tribes coming from Eastern Mediterranean, probably
From
from
the
Greece,
islands.
probably from the Far East, and for some reason they started to move across vast expanses of territories like the Mongols in the early Middle Ages. And the trigger that made them to move was probably a climate change. Once again,
It happens.
Climate change is a primary mover in the past, as we talk now, and for sure in the future. And probably one of the reasons for their moving all across the Eastern Mediterranean was a climate change, but this is not the only factor. Eric talks also about possible trigger linked with volcanoes, eruptions. We know that such an eruption take 19th century volcanoes in the Asia that completely change the climate on the whole planet for several years. That's another thing. So that probably volcano could erupt and had a major impact on the harvest, on resources. In other words, and then of course it could be wars for resources, because we know when empire grow, and it was a very nice example, not only in this period but also in later periods, such as Roman Empire. They actually had to mount wars every single year in order to get more resources from the outside.
So it's no joke that we should be serious about climate change.
It's not a joke. It can be like a global warming. It can be global cooling. But be it as it is,
the climate change
will be
changes civilization.
Climate is always a primary mover in terms of civilization.
The second thing which really strikes me is that there were huge trade ties between the kingdoms or civilizations in the Mediterranean, and the problems started with the severing of the trade ties. And actually, it reminds me the situation post-COVID, in our world. So, what happened?
We don't know for sure. Diseases, plagues, could be one of those phenomena.
Mainly in this Hittite kingdom or Hittite kingdom.
Hittite. Yes, we have, as far as I remember from the archaeological evidence, we have an upsurge of or relatively frequent what we could call mass graves, which means graves where more individuals were buried at the same time, which may indicate a kind of a plague at that time. And of course, as we said, these individual empires or kingdoms or states, in the case of the Hittites and ancient Egyptians, I would dare to talk about empires that were basically splitting the existing world between two uneven halves. And then powerful but still smaller states situated in Greece and in the Middle East, in the territory what we call nowadays Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, Israel, Palestinian territory, Iraq, and Iran. So this is the geographical area we talk about, and to identify plagues is very difficult because we don't have enough data, we don't have enough analysis from that period. But this is something to what scientists pay more and more attention, and I'm sure that in the near future we will be able to come up with more pertinent data, and I'm sure that Eric will be one of those reporters that will show them to the world as among the first ones.
Eric actually wrote that there was a big plague in the Egypt after the soldiers came back from, I don't know if it was Hittite.
That's the point, because the world was at that time so interconnected that such a plague could spread without any serious difficulty.
And what happened in 1177? That's the point.
Let me quote Ernest Hemingway. When they asked him how he went personally bankrupt at a certain stage of his life, he said, the way I declared bankruptcy was very easy. It was first a gradual thing, going without any notice, and then all of a sudden. And that's a quite general principle that when you have a leap change, I call it a leap change, that all of a sudden you have a feeling that the world is completely different. And we have many examples for this. Take, for instance, the so-called Velvet Revolution in Czech Republic in 1989, or the Arab Spring in 2010, 2011.
Or the fall of Soviet Union.
The fall of the Soviet Union, the evacuation of Afghanistan a couple of years back. It went like this, but the route to it is longer, and it consists of several subsystems that become more and more stressed, and all of a sudden they start to interact with each other, and the result is this outburst that we call a leap period. So we mentioned already several of those factors. It was the elites, the dysfunctional elites. It was the diminishing resources that have a major impact on the social contract. And if you want to rule, you need somebody who lets you to be ruled or governed. Let's use the word governed. There was probably a volcano eruption. There were probably some diseases. There was a climate change that was forcing many let's call nations or tribes to change their places of sojourns. And all this together created a perfect, what we would call a perfect storm. And
it's not the movie with the George Clooney.
And if you pay attention to what we've been discussing now, we are not preaching, but just think yourself about the factors we just enumerated. Volcanoes, climate change, social contract,
wars. There were wars, actually,
and so on. Doesn't it sound familiar to you, or does it? And now you draw your own conclusions.
And now I'm scared.
There's no need to be sad, because one of the reasons the 7 laws are so important for our future and for our sustainability is that you can use them to arrange for diagnose. And when you have a correct diagnose, then you can think about how to solve it. So there's always a huge hope, and that's what distinguishes us from the previous civilizations. We know, we have the data, we have the knowledge, and still we tend to repeat the same mistakes. This is what drives me crazy. And this is why I'm so thankful that we can promote this podcast and talk about the series and talk about the world, how we see it. And I'm quite sure that we see it completely differently from the majority of people. And that's the point, to do the things differently. And if you do them differently, you get a different perspective and you can arrive at different kind of solutions. Because what we see so far is that there have been decades of standardized approach approaches to our problems, and our problems are increasing and increasing. So it means that the standard approaches are a sort of, at least to some extent, failing to have a positive impact on the problems we've been facing since quite a few years.
So 1177 BC, it's a great lesson for us.
I think everybody should read it. The book was
Everybody
published
should read
in
it or
many
find
languages.
it on the internet. It's a well-known collapse of the civilization.
And you see, even Michal was reading it, and
Yes,
he's
I
so
was.
excited.
I didn't know the book, actually, but you told me that I should read it. So, thank you very much. Thank you for listening us, and stay with us. Bye.
Have a good morning to everyone.